Okay, so that in the background there is my 1990 Jetta GLI. Um, I have owned it probably 8 months now, and it's a really interesting car, and it's kind of a fun story. So I guess I'll kind of dive into that a little bit. About 7, 8 months, 8 or 9 months ago, I started looking for fun, cheap cars. And I had this idea that up until this point, my ventures into automotive stuff has kind of been masochistic in a sense. I've had a lot of oddball cars, not a ton of expensive cars, but a lot of oddball cars that are expensive to run, expensive to maintain, and it's there's been a scattering of cars, say in the last 20 years that I've owned that have been really, really fun but cheap. To name a few, multiple Contour SVTs that were really fun cars that were really, really cheap. And then the biggest one that comes to mind is probably my 1996 EK Honda Civic hatch. Uh, well, of course, it's a hatch, it's an EK, so that makes sense, right? Um, but that being said, I've owned some other cars that were cheap-ish, eight, nine, $10,000 cars that were a lot of fun. Then I modified a Bullet Mustang, no one Bullet Mustang, low mileage car, really clean car, modified it very nicely, and I would argue that was probably one of the nicest cars I've ever worked on, and probably the most responsible and nicest modifications and money I put into cars. After that, I moved on because I had a kid. I moved on to a B7 Audi S4, which is what I still have and a lot of what I daily. But it was kind of the ownership of that car that led me to think I really love cars. But, big but here, that car's been kind of a bear and a nightmare to own. The motor's been in and out of that car multiple times. Timing chains have, I did them because when I purchased the car, it had some issues. I paid way too much for that car. And so over the last 2.5, 3 years, I had thought, man, I want to get back to what some may call a purist performance car or something along those lines. And I'm not talking a Porsche or something high dollar. I'm talking something that is just enjoyable all around, enjoyable to drive, fun to work on, easy to work on, not something that gives you anxiety every time you go to turn the key. Something that is fun, like this, which it is, and it mostly has been a great car, and I haven't had any issues with it. I've put about, I would guess, 1,500 miles on it in that time, which I understand is not a lot. But kind of the genesis to this, or the original idea here, was me continually going, man, there's something to that $5,000 price range of cars, right? And so, give me one sec to pause here. And so, what I really started thinking about was $5,000 cars, and I don't mean to sound elitist in any way, are nothing now. They're an inconsequential purchase in the world of cars. Now, I don't want to other some people who are watching this, and $5,000 is a lot of money. Do not get me wrong. What I mean by that is, I have this conversation often with friends that is the new is a $5,000 car, is it even a common thing anymore? I don't think it is. I think a $10,000 car is kind of that new $5,000 point. And so, can you still own a car that's fun for 5 grand? And I have what I would say is kind of a bucket list that I've always wanted to own of vehicles that are still in that $5,000 range that I think provide a ton of fun for that price point. And one of the more interesting ideas I've had in the last couple years was, well, $5,000 is not a lot of money. Do I have $5,000? I don't have $5,000. Huh. If I had $5,000 cash, would I spend it on this car? No, probably not. But $5,000 even at 8-10% interest on a personal loan, which is dumb. Don't do this. I've done this multiple times, but I love cars, so to me it's totally justifiable. It's $125 a month-ish, right? And then if you take that loan from someone like Lightstream, it's a personal loan, it's not an automotive loan, meaning it's not secured by the car, which meaning it's an unsecured loan. There's no collateral on that loan, meaning they don't hold the title to that car. Kind of a cool idea, right? I'm sure other people have caught on to this and do this all the time. But the point being is, that's a $5,000 car that for all intents and purposes I own. If there's other $5,000 cars out there that I want to own, I can sell that, keep the same $125 a month payment while continuing to pay down that loan, and I get to swap out and cycle through cheap, kind of crappy, underrated cars, in my opinion. So I started with what I could find, and now I say what I could find. I actually started searching Mark II Jettas and GTIs out because I've always wanted one. My parents owned a Mark II, an 86, an 8-valve car. It was black, but it was a GLI, so same car, essentially. And always wanted one since I was old enough to drive even. I always thought that was a really interesting car that they owned. A couple of other honorable mentions that there were in my conversations and my going back and forth about potentially doing this. And part of it was that whole idea I could swap cars every couple months and just churn them in, churn them out at that $5,000 to say $6,000 price point. A couple other cars that were honorable mentions. Always wanted one, passed one up, didn't buy it, made a mistake, but was 03 to 05 SRT4 Neon. Those cars have started to climb in value. I do think people want ridiculous money for them, but every once in a while you might find a 180 to 200,000 mile car for $5,000 to $6,000, which the 2.4s were a pretty solid motor from Dodge. A lot of those Neons went for 200,000+ miles, so wouldn't really concern me. And I need to kind of preface this again with, these are $5,000 cars, so mileage doesn't scare you. I own an older Audi, and working on stuff doesn't scare me. This car right here has 172, 71 on it, something like that. I bought it with 169.5, right? So SRT4 Neon being one of those cars, I thought, okay, that'd be cool. Mazda Protege, Mazda Speed, Mazda Protege, right? 03, 04 maybe. Not the MP3, I might mess that up, the non-turbo version, but the Mazda Speed version, right? The turbo version, that's the one you want. Looked at those. Another oddball car, but kind of harkens back to when I was in high school and they were new, is a Nissan Sentra SCR V-Spec, I believe. They came with Brembos, they came with a 6-speed manual, they came with a large 2.5-liter 4-cylinder. If I remember right, they were only like 150 horsepower, so they're, nothing crazy. But a super obscure, overlooked car. I know a lot of them are hashed, got rode hard, put away wet, so to speak, but it's 150 horsepower, 6-speed. I want to say those were a limited slip diff. Don't quote me on that, but I want to say they were. You look at the bang for your buck there. I was looking the other night. You can see there's a video on my page somewhere of me just shopping cars, and those are $3,000, $3,500, right? Not that bad. Roached out, maybe, right? So there was a handful of cars in there that I always wanted to own at that $5,000 price point. Another one that I hate to admit, but I will, is an '05 Rally Sport Lancer. In a manual, of course, right? So that's kind of the caveat for all these cars. They may be crappy by today's standards, but they weren't, like, at the time, everyone remembers that 2002 to 2007, 8 era of Evos, STIs, hell, I guess a GTR, right? That's unobtainable, right? But the idea was WRXs, Evos, STIs, things of that caliber. Everyone's like, oh yeah, that was back then. That's what high school kids wanted. Yes, but that's not what high school kids could afford. Matter of fact, those cars were like for mid-30s guys who were making 50, 60K a year at the time could afford those cars. People like me couldn't afford those cars. I was 14, 15 when a Nissan Sentra Spec V came out. That was a cheap car. I'm not saying I could have bought that at 16 or 17 years old, but I think those were $21,000, $22,000. So that's kind of the perspective here. It's like, when you were young, what car would have been acceptably fun? What car would have been enjoyable to you before you knew 1,000 horsepower things existed? And so that's kind of the take on this. Another honorable mention that I looked at, and I have been dying to find one, and it just never works out. People may want a little, some people think they have more than they have. And I guess the appeal to a lot of the cars I mentioned, they're all 4 doors, right? And so one of the other cars that I've really looked at a lot since 2009 is a Cobalt SS sedan. There was only 700 to 1,000 made, I believe. And so over the years, I've found a couple here and there. The best deal on one I ever saw was 5,500 or 6,000 up in Idaho. It had like 210,000 miles on it, but it was the original owner. Tons of ZZP parts on it, tons of stuff, and you go, hey, that's a deal. Those were 260 horse Brembos. Again, I think a limited slip. So looking at that price point and looking at the cars available in that price point, some more honorable mentions are the supercharged Cobalt. I get it, only came in 2-door. By today's standard, 205 horsepower and a 4-cylinder is absolute trash. But kind of interesting. Another car, same exact platform, Pontiac, what was it? Ion Redline, the quad coupe, right? With the suicide doors in the back. Supercharged, basically the same thing as the Cobalt. You look at all these cars, and kind of their common theme is the price point and just affordability and accessibility to the everyday person. This car's a little obscure, I would say, in what might be more in that collector's wheelhouse. Like, there is a cult following to 80s Volkswagens. My problem now is I've had this car that long. I don't know if there's better $5,000 cars. That's my problem, is I really enjoy this. My family actually even likes it. My kids like it. I think it's cool. My wife loves it. She wants to drive it all the time. So I think that's my dilemma now, is after I thought this would be a year-long ownership story, and then right now would be getting ready to post it and get ready to sell it. But I don't know if I can do that. And so the problem becomes, where do I put it when I go to buy the next $5,000 car? Because that's going to happen, I think. In reality, would I be able to part with this? Probably. I think, you get tired of owning stuff at a certain point. But the idea of the whole churning the $5,000 car is to build experience in cars, enjoy cars and different things. You're not buying buckets that need tons of work and tons of money being dumped into them. And then on the back end of that, because you're not buying the absolute worst example of the car and you're owning it a short term, you might end up putting $300-400 into it, $500 into it. But for that experience over the course of, say, 6 months to a year, that's worth it. It's worth owning something different and weird. Honorable mention, and then I'll stop. Saab Vigan, the 2001, I think it was 9.3. They made them in a convertible, kind of interesting, kind of weird. I guess my list is it leaves out some cars that are probably still in that price point or at the upper mileage tiers are in that price point, such as a 8th gen Civic Si. And kind of my whole point of leaving like cars like that out is those cars were hailed as the best of their time. There's no debating that. They are good cars. I had a beautiful drive in Cave Junction, Oregon with a 8th gen Mugen Si. It may be one of the greatest front wheel drive cars ever. I haven't driven them all, right? But from my experience, that thing was incredible, and it was stock, and it had 225,000 miles on it, and it was just it's a solid car, right? But if you put that on a sliding scale and you just say that's a 10 out of 10, maybe an SRT4 Neon in comparison, that's a little unfair because it's a turbo car, it's faster. Maybe that's a 7 out of 10, 7.5 out of 10. We could argue about that in the comment section. I'm fine with that. Because some of you might say the Neon is a better car, and I may agree with you. But I think like a fairer comparison that I've always thought is, what if you had a Rally Art Lancer and you did some suspension work to it, or you did some stickier tires or whatever, right? And it's a 5-speed, it makes 150 horsepower. Is that close to as good as a EM1 SI Civic? And I get it. That sounds absurd. But for the dollar, your fun per dollar is insanely low on those undesirable cars that kind of have a fun spot in automotive history. And so, like, you get to own something weird, you get to be different, and you get to do it at a price point that's actually obtainable for most young people. In reality, I've gotten some great opportunities in life to buy stupid cars. I think I've owned over 50 cars since I was 16 years old. Not everyone gets those opportunities. Sometimes you buy a $5,000 car and you're into that car for, if it's your hobby, you might have that car for 5 or 6 years. You might need to have that car for 5 or 6 years to keep the hobby alive while you're sorting out life stuff and career changes and whatnot. And so I guess what I've always had the dilemma of is I never want to leave the hobby behind. And if that meant I had to sell my Audi tomorrow and keep this because that keeps the hobby alive at a low entry point, I would do that in a heartbeat because I love cars that much. So I guess this video is to kind of help those younger folks who struggle through, like, what the hell? I just scroll through Instagram and it's people with their 1,000 horsepower, $100,000 GTR builds on top of the car, right? Or man, I really wish I could have a Mark IV Supra and I can't, so I shouldn't even get into it. No, get into it. Enjoy older, dumber cars, weirder, odder cars. I'd even say there's more out there than you think. And now with AI and the ability to research stuff so quickly and easily, I don't think there's any excuse not to find a fun car if you're into cars. Because a car's going to cost you minimum $5,000 anyway. So if you think you might be into cars, buy something like this. Drive it, enjoy it, and I don't think you'll regret that at all. Anyway, check out my other videos. I don't have a whole lot on my page right now, but I'll hopefully get some more out there soon.